Lando Norris took pole position today by the largest margin that we have seen all season. Part of the reason that margin was so large was that Pierre Gasly did spin out in Q3. That caused a yellow flag, which did require a number of drivers to bail out of their final lap, and two of the drivers that affected were Oscar Piastri and Max Verstappen. And I do think qualifying answered one of the biggest questions we had going into this race. Qualifying was frankly full of surprises. While everyone did expect that either Lando Norris or Oscar Piastri would likely be on pole, what we didn't expect was to see Liam Lawson qualify P6 ahead of Max Verstappen, making this Liam's absolute best performance yet this season. Additionally, we saw Gabriel Bortoleto make his first Q3 appearance, and we saw Yuki Tsunoda knocked out in Q1 again. Isaac Hadjar also didn't make it into Q3, which was surprising for him and made Liam Lawson's performance look even better. And of course, we saw the upgrades that the Ferraris brought actually bring some impressive performance for them. We also saw George Russell, who won last race, struggle to make it through qualifying, putting himself in the drop zone in both Q1 and Q2. And of course, that performance comes surrounded by the conversation of whether or not his contract will be renewed at Mercedes, or if Max Verstappen might be interested in a seat at that team. But I do think one of the biggest conversations is about Lando Norris versus Oscar Piastri, as we've seen most of this season be. Coming out of Montreal, we saw Lando Norris end his own race by colliding with Oscar Piastri. And there was this large conversation that I think ended up in two camps. One camp was this idea that Lando was getting desperate in his desire to pass Oscar, and that desperation caused him to make a poor move on track, and that this was sort of the end of his championship battle. And then the other camp, which was the camp that I was in, was that Lando Norris was actually starting to be willing to take big risks. Between these two drivers, Lando Norris has been the one who has been less willing to make a move that could poorly affect his team, where we've seen Oscar make a number of large risky moves on track which have benefited him over Lando. And so while last week did not go Lando's way, it did signal to me that Lando was becoming more aggressive and less risk adverse. And I thought the most important thing would be seeing how the two of them showed up to track this week. Lando actually came with one less free practice session than Oscar this weekend, but then the second we saw him get back on track in free practice 2 all the way through qualifying, we saw him topping these timesheets. And what will be very interesting about tomorrow is that not only did Lando end up on pole, but Oscar is not on the front row next to him. Because of this increased performance from the Ferraris that were not necessarily expected, Charles Leclerc actually lines up P2, and on the second row we have Oscar Piastri in P3 and Lewis Hamilton in P4. And I think what will be interesting to see in this driver's battle is how many other teams are able to keep themselves in the mix up at the front, because for both Lando and Oscar, just continuing to have 1-2 finishes doesn't open up the gap in the way that you would want to feel comfortable. And with McLaren having as large of a gap as they do for the constructors title, the driver's title is really what's left up for grabs. And so it'll be interesting to see how things move as we have more cars in the mix. This week shapes up to look like Lando Norris has his game face on, and the question will be between him and Oscar who can keep it steady the longest. So I'm curious for you, tomorrow's lineup is quite interesting. What does that first lap look like to you tomorrow? And do you think one of these McLaren drivers takes the driver's title?